Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today to mark World Mental Health Day, which officially is celebrated on the 10th of October, which is tomorrow. Did you know that 2020 marks the 28th year that World Mental Health Day has been celebrated? My name is Cariad Kenan. I'm the Head of Learning and Development for Rapport Guest Service, and joining me today is Charlotte Wiseman. Charlotte is an applied positive psychologist and leadership consultant who is known for her pioneering work in mental fitness. Before I go on to introduce Charlotte properly, can I ask you please, if you have any questions throughout today's session, please to drop them on the Q&A, and we'll come to those at the end of today's session. So Charlotte, thank you so much for joining us today. We're delighted to have you and have the opportunity to discuss such an important topic.
Thanks, Cariad. Thanks for inviting me on today.
So Charlotte, can you tell us a little bit about the impact that coronavirus has had on mental health?
Yeah, I think I think there's enough press about this, isn't there? There's every newspaper we read is something about the negative impact of mental health, of coronavirus on mental health, on perhaps the fact that people are isolated, losing their jobs, they might be finding it harder to switch off. Microsoft have done a very big study actually using Teams to assess how much people are kind of taking breaks and what working hours are like. And they're definitely seeing that people are not taking breaks. People are working later into the evenings, maybe not starting. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge that I'm seeing, is that people finding it hard to create these boundaries. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the companies I'm working with, that's a large part of what we're trying to do, is to help leaders support their teams to create those healthy boundaries. Because if we're overworking, we're actually not only reducing our mental fitness or our mental well-being, you know, it does have a knock-on effect on performance and productivity, which declines because we're not getting the breaks we need. And therefore, you know, we essentially have to work longer hours because we're so ineffective with the times we are working. So it's a really important aspect. But also there have been a lot of positive results of this, and I think that's maybe what I think is more interesting to talk about, because it's not getting the airtime that the negative impact is. So I think a lot of people, having been put on furlough for a long time, are suddenly realizing, actually I do quite like my job, or I get something out of my job. And as you know, that's a huge part of my mission with the training I do and the offerings I give to companies is, you know, work is something we should want to go and do, because we want purpose. You know, we get a huge amount of positive benefits from the rhythm, the routine, the fact that we're learning, we're growing, the fact that we get a sense of achievement, we set goals, the financial stability, all of those things are very positive for our mental health. And yet workplaces are too often demonized as the source of stress. Well, actually, it's the way we're working in those spaces that turn them into stressful environments, rather than what they could be, which is health enhancing and life enhancing environments. Mm-hmm. So I think people are starting to see the value of their work, the value of having a job. I think also people are seeing the importance of investing time in themselves and in their relationships, and how important those personal relationships are. So I do think there have been some benefits as well as some perhaps challenges that we're facing. And I think, you know, we've just got to see those challenges as opportunities to grow, learn about ourselves, and move forward from there.
I wholeheartedly agree, absolutely. And like you said, there's a lot of press around the negative impact, but actually, you know, every cloud has a silver lining. And although this is a terrible situation we find ourselves in, there are quite a lot of positives. I completely agree. So Charlotte, you spoke about mental fitness. What does that actually mean?
Well, what I'll do is I've got a slide here which will sort of help to explain it. It used to be that we thought that kind of mental health had this one x-axis of a continuum, and someone would either have an illness or they didn't. And that was really traditionally how mental health was viewed. And I would suggest a lot of people still understand that you either have an illness, and if you don't have an illness, you're fine. But what we discovered in 2002, there was a researcher called Corey Keyes who identified this second axis, this y-axis, and that is our day-to-day mental fitness. So that is our ability to kind of deal with the ups and downs of life. essentially to motivate ourselves, to stay focused, to switch off when we need to switch off, to be patient, to communicate effectively, to be productive, you know, all of those things that perhaps we know are at the core of our mental health. We kind of realize that those are separate to whether someone has an illness or not. So someone might have an illness and not be able to motivate themselves or manage their responsibilities from a day-to-day perspective. But once they've got the right support or treatment, they can have optimal mental fitness. On the flip side, just because someone has good mental fitness and no illness doesn't mean that if they, you know, they can't fall down to this level of low mental fitness, even though they don't have a diagnosis. So these sort of the individuals maybe who found it hard to motivate themselves, they're just kind of getting through. And we kind of, there's a group of people who are very low on this axis here, kind of down in this bottom right quadrant, who are what we call languishing. And they're essentially less engaged with life than someone with an illness. They're just surviving. You know, they find it hard to motivate themselves. They feel like they've got nothing to look forward to. They're just existing, sleepwalking through life. And the key to this is that, you know, we're all on this continuum somewhere. We all have mental health of some, you know, and it's just that we're moving around this continuum. But what the key with mental health awareness needs to be is that mental health awareness is not just being aware of illness. It's being aware that we all are on here and we all can do something to optimize our day-to-day mental fitness. And that goes into the workplace of, you know, let's not just try and be understanding that some people have illness and other people don't. Let's help everybody along that x-axis to optimize their mental fitness so they can have a good quality of life. And they can, as the World Health Organization say, mental health is a state of well-being in which everyone can realize their own potential. They can add fruitfully to their community, to their workplaces. And that's really what mental fitness is all about.
Great, thank you, Charlotte. Just there's a question that has popped up. I know I said we'll look at them at the end, but I think this is probably more to do with what we're talking about now. It says, how do you identify that you are in this section?
I'm not sure which section you mean, but I'm guessing maybe bottom right. The interesting thing about this is that a lot of people are down here, and we quite often normalize the symptoms. So if there are some symptoms of, you know, physical signs, perhaps like backache, stomach problems, headaches, sleep problems, we often just say, oh, they're normal. You know, you have headaches, take a paracetamol. You've got backaches, oh, get some physio. Oh, you need a new chair, it's your desk. I mean, I went through so many physiotherapists. I carried on getting people to scan my back. When my doctor told me that my back and hip problems might be related to my stress levels, I got rather angry with them and probably showed the best of my stress signals. Equally, I was cutting out food groups for a long time, thinking that they were related to intolerances, when in hindsight, both of those things were very much related to my mental health. And once I got hold of and managed my mental fitness more effectively, I actually don't have any of those symptoms anymore. So there are physical signs we can look out for. We can also look out for signs of lack of focus. That is something that you can train yourself into doing. So it's perhaps just that you're not really trying to focus. There's a kind of a balance there. You know, if you're letting yourself have lots of distractions around you, well, you're giving yourself a tough deal. But an inability to focus, a memory loss, any kind of changes that you notice in your own day-to-day behavior, maybe you're becoming a little bit snappier with people. Those are all signs that even if you're not down in this bottom right quadrant, you might be declining down that right side. So I'd suggest that if anyone has had any shift in what they're noticing, that they feel is starting to impair their life, it's actually starting to impact their life, that's when we can start to take ownership of it. So a kind of a way we can think about it is that when you have a good level of mental fitness, the stresses of life happen, you know, the changes, the challenges, and okay, they're not going to be easy. It's not like you're suddenly going to be working from home and it's going to be a doddle, but you're going to feel like, okay, I've got this, you know, I'm still able to realize that I'm doing my best, and that's okay. When you start to notice those stress signatures, which are those things I've sort of mentioned, maybe being snappy or emotional, demotivated, lack of focus, all those physical signs. If you notice those, it's really important that we take notice rather than just ignoring them. So if you can notice sooner, you can then say, right, well, what can I do to help myself? And that's essentially using your mental fitness tab. And we all have a series of helpful activities that we can do to try and release some of that stress. We also all have a load of unhelpful things that we tend to all do. So, for example, a helpful thing might be to make lists and prioritize stuff. But an unhelpful thing would be, like I do, tidy my lists and organize my lists and make a new list, but not do anything on my list. So subtle things like that. Maybe a helpful strategy would be to do a little bit of a late evening one day or a little bit of extra work. But if you're working every night of the week late, then you're not actually maintaining a kind of a level of performance. So it's just about noticing your helpful and your unhelpful strategies and try to employ more of those helpful strategies. So actually you could share this handout to help people with that after the session. It might be quite useful for you guys to be able to practice and explore that. Like, what is your stress signature? What are those unhelpful and helpful things? Just a thought on that. Right now, when there's probably a lot of things that are maybe worrying you or concerning you that are out of your control, we do have to be conscious that for those things, actually, sometimes distraction is a very effective approach. Whereas obviously, if there's something that's within your control, distraction is just procrastination. So this process has to be very honest with yourself about, okay, do I have the capacity to do something about this? If not, I might just have to accept it. And if I do have some control, and just sort of being conscious of that.
Great, thank you. So just going back to when you had the slide with the continuum, there was obviously the triangle. Sorry, the indicator in the middle was about the stigma. So really, my question is around how do we reduce the stigma that's attached to mental health?
Well, I think a large part of that stigma is actually because when we talk about mental health, people often mean mental ill health or mental illness. So the number of companies I walk into and they go, so glad you're here because we've got loads of mental health here. Well, of course, because for every employee, you've got a level of mental health, but mental illness is something very different. So we do need to make sure we're differentiating from that. I would perhaps go even one step further, that even the fact that we talk about mental health as this separate entity is somehow creating a stigma, because actually our mental health is a fundamental part of our overall health. So the World Health Organization talks about health as mental, physical, and social well-being. So if we say that that's health, then we shouldn't be needing to identify this separate body as mental health. We should just say, oh, that is our health. Because they are all working together. You know, our physical health impacts our social and our mental health. Our social health impacts our mental and our physical health. So it's all kind of working together. So I think if we can just start to see that our mental health is a fundamental part of our health, and as the World Health Organization say, there is no health without mental health. So that's one piece. And just being conscious of when perhaps we use other pieces of language which really maybe devalue people's experiences. So a lot of people will casually say, oh, I'm a bit OCD, because they like their kitchen clean or they like a tidy desk. Well, that's actually very different to a clinical diagnosis of OCD. So we need to be conscious of using the right language. You know, saying, oh, I'm a bit depressed at the moment. Well, it's a very different thing to a clinical depression. And so we just need to be conscious of that kind of language. And another classic one is people talk about committing suicide. Well, actually, you know, the reason that it was always called commit was it was considered at one point illegal. It's not illegal now. So actually, if we can move away from using that word commit, which does have some stigma, and talk about someone taking their own life or ending their life or attempting to end their own life by suicide, that is a less stigmatized phrase. So, you know, I think, you know, anyone who's done the mental health first aid course will know that this is a really interesting area that we could keep diving into. And I hope in the not too distant future, the media will start to pick up on this and start to consider the language they're using a little bit more, because papers and media are definitely adding into this on a day-to-day basis.
Great, thank you. So Charlotte, research suggests that 1 in 4 adults will experience a mental illness at some point in the year here in the UK. So, of course, we really want to understand, how should you ask somebody about their mental fitness? So, you know, what's the right, you spoke about language, what's the right language? How do you go about doing that? Well,
you know, to start with, I think we over worry about this. You know, that the big step is just find a space and a time and say to someone, you know, how are you doing? Obviously, that has to be a place where they're going to feel open and able to speak. So, you know, you might need to get someone off a group call and onto the phone or onto a private call. You might want to go and meet someone for a coffee or meet someone for lunch, go for a walk, you know, things that you've got just you and them. When you ask someone how they are, probably their initial answer is just going to be okay, not bad, fine. So asking them to rate how they're feeling on a scale of 1 to 10 is a very effective way to perhaps open that conversation. Absolutely fine to say something like, you know, you don't seem to be yourself. Are you sure you're okay? Or is there anything you want to talk about? So we're just really, you know, it's not about picking up on, oh, you've made this mistake at work. We want to make it very general about how they as a person seem to be. But just creating a safe space where someone feels they can speak, and respecting if they don't want to speak, but letting them know that you're there if and when they do. If they are willing to say, you know, I'm a 5, usually that gives you the entrance to a bit more of a conversation, because they will probably say, I'm a 5, I didn't sleep so well, or I'm a 5, I got a bit better sleep last night. Or you can ask, you know, well, what's making you a 5 today? And that'll just give you some ways you can then ask more open questions to explore that. And the key is then actually the next stage being the hardest, just listening and not telling people they shouldn't worry, they should be grateful for what they've got. None of that stuff is required. Just listen and say, I can see this is hard for you. Can you tell me more? Thank you for telling me. Is there anything I can do to support you? So really just not trying to fix what you perceive as a problem, because there is nothing to fix there, but letting them know that you've heard them, you've understood them, and that you'd love to help them get some support, whatever is suitable for them. Now, the mental health first aid course is obviously like a 2-day course where we explore this and we explore this, and I run a lot of 1-day courses and half-day courses and all sorts of different trainings where we dive into that. But the key is, as long as you're approaching and asking and really listening, that is the key. That is the key, because for someone to be heard is a huge step. And you might worry that you're going to pry, but most people want to speak. It's just they perhaps don't know how to start that conversation.
Great, thank you. I mean, I think there's a lot out there at the moment in terms of how important that validation of somebody else's feelings are, to acknowledge what they're saying to you and then offer that support rather than giving your advice or your own suggestions, which is very easy to do. But actually, like you said, it's about listening and asking them what support they need. So Charlotte, why is it so important to look after ourselves?
Wow.
In terms of mental fitness.
I mean, you know, our mental health or our mental fitness affects every single thing we do every single day. You know, it affects our thoughts, it affects our feelings, it affects how we behave, which means it's affecting how we're engaging with every single person from the moment we wake up to how we perform our work, to how productive we are. That also then will have an impact on how we are perceiving ourselves, because, you know, oh, I've had a really unproductive day, why aren't I doing this? It perceives, you know, it impacts how we perceive the world, how we think others see us, how we see ourselves. It will actually impact how we see our past and we remember our past, as well as how we see our future. So it's really impacting our quality of life, you know, every single day from the beginning of our lives. And if we do take it for granted, as most people do, that is going to mean that we're essentially not having the best quality of life that we could. And certainly in times like this, I think people are perhaps just realizing that, because of how much it impacts how we deal with the normal stress of life. And when we have a good level of mental fitness, we actually find that challenges and change and difficulties and sort of the pressure of life sometimes are things that actually help us grow stronger. And so through those challenges are the opportunities for us to grow stronger, grow more resilient, experience greater achievement, fulfillment, happiness. So it's really, really important that if we have that base level of mental fitness, it's not just about being able to then manage challenge. Those challenges become an opportunity to grow even stronger. So you kind of get caught on this upward spiral of increased mental fitness, increased fulfillment, increased satisfaction. And that has a ripple effect not only on you, but on every single person you interact with. And so that was really very much the foundation of applied positive psychology, was looking at if we could get everybody globally to improve their mental fitness just 2 or 3%, we could actually have a bigger impact than if we just took those people with mental illness and got those people back to being kind of okay. So it's about the fact that we can globally have an impact on everybody helping themselves and helping each other and becoming this sort of resilient culture globally. And that's really, really important. And that starts with individuals taking care of their own mental health so they can support and inspire others.
Great, thank you. So at this point in time, in our current reality, many of us are working from home or even are on furlough. And so there's a lot of different video calls that are going on. Maybe it's a new webinar you're watching, or a new skill you're learning, or even team calls. And so often with so many of these calls that happen throughout the day, we very often then don't want to have those sort of social calls at the end of the day, because you think, if I have to be on another video call, you know, I think it's just not going to be great for me. But actually looking at what's important for looking after ourselves and our mental fitness, of course, there is an element of that human connection with other people that are very special to us. So what are your thoughts about that, in terms of being so, I suppose, overwhelmed with all of the video conferencing opportunities that we have, that we actually then let those relationships slide potentially? Yeah,
it is a very difficult one. I think so many people have moved into the remote world assuming that whatever I did in the office, I can continue to do remotely through the same number of meetings I can have the same number of meetings. I can keep going at the same pace in the same way, and not realizing that actually we do have to adapt for a number of reasons. And also, so what we're finding is that when we're doing these video calls, they're actually cognitively more exhausting than having meetings in an office. What happens is that because we can't read so much of the body language from someone, we have to work extra hard to try and read the bits of body language and the verbal communication. So that's kind of quite hard work for our brain, so it's quite exhausting. On top of that, even seeing your own image in the corner of the screen is quite exhausting for us. We've kind of got this subtext in the back of our head where she's like slightly judging us. When you see people, you know, you've all been on that call where you're on the call and you can tell someone else is doing something, you know, they're looking down, they're checking the phone, they see an email come in, you know, and that distraction, you're then working hard to get their attention back. So it's harder for us cognitively. Also, the momentary pauses that we get in a workplace, we're not getting at home. So, you know, you used to maybe meet in a meeting room, so you would get up from your laptop or your computer, you would walk across the office, you might stop and grab a glass of water, you'd have a quick chat with someone, you'd go to your meeting room. Now in your head, you've just moved from a task to a meeting, but you've actually had a break there and you've had a social interaction. When you're doing it at home, you do just stop your emails, sit where you are and carry on the video call. So you're not having those momentary pauses. So we need to be very practical and active about scheduling those in. You also, we know that the pauses we do have when you're online and perhaps the video freezes or there's a pause as someone thinks, just 1.2 seconds of delay, you're already put into a subtle stress response of, oh, is my video still working? Am I online? Did my internet go down? Did I say something stupid? So again, that's heightening that exhaustion because we're constantly like, is it working? Am I okay? Final thing that this is really exhausting for us, again, because we're not moving physically, it's hard for our brains to switch from one task to the other. So again, you have different tasks which you do in different places in an office. At home, you have to create that. So it can be really useful to do certain tasks in certain spaces in your home. If you have the capacity to maybe do emails in one place and then move slightly for when you're doing video calls, and then move slightly if you're maybe doing brainstorming or something else, even if it's moving around one table, so you've got a subtle view, you'll create what we call the cognitive scaffold in the brain, so that it knows, okay, I'm switching from one task to the other. So I have in my co-working space, which I'm now back in, I have different places where I do certain tasks, and that makes it easier for me to flick in to do those tasks, and it's very much less exhausting for the brain. So really, what we need to be doing is be more wise with our daytime planning, and then you might have the capacity to find that time in the evening for friends. But also, you know, don't feel the pressure to always do a video call with a friend. They're probably feeling the same, you know, a phone call, a WhatsApp voice message at a time when you do feel it, whatever it is, to stay connected, that's absolutely fine. But the key is planning our meetings more consciously, not assuming just because you had a meeting in a workplace, you need to have that meeting online. Could it be shorter? Could it be different? Could it be different people? You know, be creative. I always say, don't replicate, innovate. That's the key with this. You know, just don't replicate the office. We've got to innovate and create a new process for working at home. And that does need to include different meeting practices, formal taking of breaks, and creating this cognitive scaffold.
Great, thank you, Charlotte. So how can we support our teams at work? What are some of those hints and tips?
Well, there's a couple of things that I think are really important. Number one, when we're working remotely, we're not getting as much of the kind of subtle feedback of support from people, that recognition that we're doing okay. So we're all generally finding that there's a little bit more self-doubt in everybody's mind. Am I doing enough? Is everyone else doing more? Is this okay? Am I, you know, there's a kind of a slight worry. So we need to be very encouraging to teams. And what can be more effective than just using your standard, thank you for doing that, that's great, is to integrate the concept of character strengths, which is a very well-researched area of positive psychology, which looks at how, rather than fixing people's weaknesses, can we optimize people's strengths? So pick up on people's character strengths, get them to do more of it, and that leads to greater productivity, greater improvement in performance, greater resilience psychologically, but also physically. So the research has been shown that when we engage with our strengths more effectively, we actually improve our immunity, which is, you know, a kind of an extra hidden bonus right now. So what character strengths are, and I'll show you these ones. These were the original VIA character strengths that were identified. So there were 24 character strengths that in the 90s were identified as being fundamental cross-culturally and cross-time to add positively to people's lives and positively to their communities. Now, I will add that I have added in trust here, because subsequently, since that initial study in '98, we have found that in the workplace, trust is also a very, very important aspect of optimizing people's mental fitness. So I have added that in. But these are the kind of core qualities that people bring to their work. So someone's strengths are not maybe that they're a good salesperson, it's more that maybe they've got a love of learning and a social intelligence and a creativity, and that's what enables them to do their job well. So what we can do is we can start to identify our own strengths, but also encourage our teams to identify strengths in others. We can give feedback based on people's character strengths, so more about their character strengths and a little bit less about actually the content of their work. And it's very much more meaningful, very much more motivational for people, and it makes people feel valued as individuals, which is very important. So for example, rather than saying, thank you for doing that piece of work for me, it would be, thank you so much for doing that piece of work. I really admire your slightly different perspective on this, because I know that sometimes I go down one track and your different perspective is really useful. Thank you, it shows great teamwork. It's a much more valuable, important, meaningful thank you. Equally, if you're going to ask someone to do it, I wonder if I could ask you to do this, because I really admire your creativity, and I think I just need someone to think a little bit out of the box on this one. very much more inspiring to someone to say, yeah, they've chosen me and I'm going to do this well. So that's a very simple process. You can get teams in meetings to spot strengths in each other's. So I do a huge number of different workshops and ways to do this. And there's actually on my website a downloadable guide to strengths and how we can explore that. So worth taking a look, because this is a really interesting area for ourselves and for each other. The other thing teams can do is to actually have conversations in alignment with this idea. So checking in with people regularly on how they're doing on a scale of 1 to 10. Asking people what the highlights of their day was, so, or the week was, so you could start a meeting by what was the highlight of your week. As humans, we have a negativity bias. So if you say to someone, how was your week? They're going to be more likely to pick up a negative. If you ask them what the highlight has been, they will be seeking positive experiences. That actually optimizes learning, creative thinking, innovation. So very, very useful. We want to accept that people are having challenges and ask people to discuss them openly and not be scared of that, because we are all finding different challenges every day, I hope. But we want to then say, well, what strengths have you used in overcoming that? And what have you learned as a result of that? So really, really helping people to realize that there are still good things to look forward to. Challenges are okay and they are to be embraced and learnt from. So those are just a couple of things that you could do with your teams and in the workplace.
Great, thank you so much, Charlotte. Lots of fantastic things there. And my final question before we move over to the other questions from the attendees is, can you suggest any other resources to continue this journey of development and awareness with regards to mental fitness?
I would suggest that the best way forward is probably the resources on my website. The blog section now from my website has videos, it's got articles, it's got links to other articles. So there's loads under the blog, the wellness blog. Also under the resources section, there's a couple of downloadable guides. There's a few book recommendations, podcasts. So suggest if you just go to charlottewiseman.com and look at the blog and the resources, those are going to give you a lot. I do also have Instagram with the occasional tip on it. I'm not the most active person when it comes to Instagram, but Charlotte Wiseman _ does have a few tips on there, and worth a look probably too. But yeah, that's probably where I'd suggest, just because it has then links to further people that I think have a good grounding and a good variety of support.
Great, thank you very much, Charlotte. So I'm going to go over to the questions from our participants. So the first question is, how do we figure it out if someone needs to get diagnosed or not? And what signs should we check for?
Realistically, the ones I've already mentioned, those sorts of things, any change in someone is worth having a conversation, but it's not your position to decide whether they need to be diagnosed. That's really the big challenge. We sort of think that what we want to do is help someone grow their awareness about what is going on for you, how long's it been going on for you, and then ask them if they would be open to exploring support, and whether that is ourselves, or I'm guessing most of your listeners will have access to an EAP. So just letting that person know that the EAP is there. The EAP is there it's a phone line, for those of you who don't know. It's a telephone number, and that person is an expert who can give someone tips for if they've just had a decline in mental fitness. They can give them some tips for that. They can also direct them to getting a diagnosis if that is needed. So they're really more able and more skilled to do that. It's very hard for us, and it's very easy for us as humans to judge, like, oh, that person's got this. Actually, we don't know. I've done a series of trainings. I'm a mental health first aid trainer, all these things. I still can't tell whether someone has a diagnosis because I'm not a registered clinical psychologist of that style. So really important that we don't try and diagnose. We just have a conversation, help someone understand how long's this been going on for. And if it's been going on for sort of 2, 3, 4 weeks, then actually saying, well, would you like some support? And if someone doesn't want support, try to find out why, because there will be the same old answers that you get. There are other people worse off than me. well, you don't have to wait to get to the bottom of the pile before you start getting some help. It just gets harder the longer you leave it. I don't have time. Well, perhaps you could ask that person or support that person by covering them, or picking up a friend, picking up a kid from school if it was a friend. You could do things to help them find that time. Someone might not know where to go. They might be worried that the NHS waiting lists are so long and therefore not realise that they could call the EAP for more immediate support. So it's just trying to help them through those obstacles. And if someone doesn't want help, respecting that, and then checking in a couple of weeks later just to see if anything's changed. The only time we wouldn't respect, I mean, it's a difficult one. If someone admitted to being potentially at risk of suicide, so if they were thinking about suicide or hurting themselves or someone else, that would be the only time that we would actually be legally bound to tell someone without that person's permission. We would, would have to tell someone, whether that be the emergency services or the mental health first aiders in your organisation, or a manager or somebody. But you do have to generally make sure that you're telling someone, and the sooner that can happen, the better. It really needs to happen immediately.
Great, thank you very much, Charlotte. So we do have another question which is fairly similar, and I do believe that you have actually covered that in the answer that you've just given.
Okay.
So if anybody else has any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. But Charlotte, thank you so much. I think it's such an important topic, and a really, really important area to raise awareness, because like you said, a lot of people have misconceptions, and also the language that we use plays a very, very big part in demonstrating to somebody how seriously we take what they're saying to us, or how we view this. And I know that we're incredibly fortunate within Rapport that actually we have a great and robust mental health and well-being strategy, and of that we have currently around about 20 and growing mental health first aiders in our business, which means that we roughly have about 1 mental health first aider to every 20 members of staff, roughly. And of course, we're going to continue that commitment in terms of building that community within our business. And already, I think that we have had a lot of our teams reach out, and it's been a great support to have somebody who is potentially impartial to their own where they work and their own specific site, and to be able to give them that advice or guidance, or at least signpost them to perhaps articles or other organisations that may be able to help them further. It has been invaluable, absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to the next course, which we've got.
Absolutely. So our next question is, professional help for mental illness or low mental health can be very expensive compared to help for physical illness. What suggestions do you have for someone on a budget? Good question.
Well, I think what's really often forgotten is that while the NHS waiting lists for one-to-one therapy can be long in certain areas, there is a lot of support they can offer short term, which is very, it's sort of more immediately. So I've got friends who have had telephone calls, online therapy, all sorts of support groups, and all of that stuff through the NHS, and there is a huge amount, is all currently offered totally free. So it's worth exploring that. It is also worth exploring a lot of the charities. So the Mind charity in certain areas can offer free support and therapy. So a lot of those, again, if you check up on my website, and also I know on Cariad on my Rapport, you've been adding some resources. There's a lot of stuff available totally for free. Some therapists will also offer reduced prices. If you go to Time With is a service which will help you identify therapists. So there are options, but equally, again, if it's someone that works for the company or for a big organization, get them to check, because that is totally free. And then beyond that, there can be a lot of support that EAP can give for people. But yeah, don't underestimate the different options that the NHS can offer. They might be quick to offer you as medication, or but it's never something you have to take. You can always ask them, what else can you offer? If you want to explore online therapy or different approaches, group therapy, support groups, really, really powerful. So yeah.
Great, thank you very much, Charlotte. So I think that really brings us to the end of today's session, unless there are any other last minute questions to come through. But I'd like to say a very, very big thank you to you, Charlotte. I think that has been incredibly informative, and I think a lot of food for thought. A lot of great information there, things that we can take away and actually utilize in the business with our teams and also at home. So it's not just for work. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Cariad, and thanks, Gavin, for all your support.
Thanks so much. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.